The grand conference room aboard the Galactic peace station buzzed with an air of quiet expectation. It was a neutral ground, the seat of negotiations where the most powerful beings in the galaxy had gathered to end the war that had dragged on for decades. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Planets had been shattered, entire species decimated. It was a conflict that had strained every corner of the galaxy, and now, after years of bloodshed, they were finally ready for peace. The seats around the massive, oval-shaped table were occupied by representatives from every major faction: the Zorath, the Brellians, the Rylax, and the Humans, among others. The leaders of these factions had spent the last several weeks drafting a peace treaty that would end the war once and for all. But they all knew that there were risks. Some were eager to broker a deal. Others, though, were reluctant, seeing the armistice as a sign of weakness. They believed that they could still dominate the galaxy. Among the leaders, there was one that stood out above the rest: General Nathaniel Clark, the human representative. His reputation preceded him. Clark was no diplomat by trade, but he had led the human resistance with unmatched skill and tenacity. He had earned the respect and fear of every species present. His force had shifted the balance of the war in favor of humanity. If there was one thing the galaxy had learned, it was that underestimating humans was a dangerous mistake. As the representatives took their seats, there was an undeniable tension in the room. Words were exchanged quietly, some species speaking in their native tongues, others translating with advanced technology. But through it all, Clark remained calm, his face stoic, his posture relaxed but commanding. He wasn't here to appease anyone. He was here for peace, but peace on humanity's terms. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the human delegation entered the room. Clark walked in first, flanked by Ambassador Sarah Hennings and Lieutenant Jack Walker. They were dressed in simple uniforms, but the aura they carried was anything but simple. Each step they took felt like a statement, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity would no longer bend to anyone's will. The other leaders watched them intently, their eyes narrow and calculating. They had seen humanity's strength in battle, and now they were about to see if they had the same resolve at the negotiation table. The first few hours of the meeting were tense. Each leader took their turn presenting their terms for peace, and the humans listened in silence. The Brellians demanded reparations, claiming they had suffered the greatest losses. The Zorath insisted on gaining control of several strategic planets, while the Rylax wanted a military alliance to prevent future conflicts. It was the same dance, the same demands, with no real intent to compromise. At first, Clark said nothing. He sat silently, his hands folded on the table. His gaze was focused, but his expression was unreadable. Sarah Hennings spoke occasionally, offering diplomatic gestures, translating, trying to keep the tone civil. But it was clear to everyone in the room that humanity wasn't here to bow to anyone's demands. They had come for peace, but they were not going to give up everything just to get it. As the hours wore on, it became apparent that the peace talks were heading nowhere. The factions refused to budge. They all wanted something, but none of them were willing to sacrifice. The arguments grew louder, more heated. Accusations flew across the room, and the atmosphere shifted from one of hopeful negotiation to one of simmering hostility. The peace talks were unraveling right before their eyes. It was at this moment that Clark finally stood. His chair scraped against the floor as he rose to his full height. The room fell silent in an instant. All eyes turned toward him, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "We've been here for hours," Clark said, his voice low but firm. "And what have we accomplished? Nothing. We're all sitting here pretending to be civil, pretending that we want peace. But what I see is a room full of people who still think they can win the war by making demands." A murmur spread through the room. It was rare that a representative, let alone a human, would speak with such bluntness in these talks. Clark took a step forward, his eyes scanning the leaders. "This war didn't start with us. Humanity wasn't the one who attacked first, but we've paid for it. My people have bled, fought, and died for this moment. And we're here today because we want peace. But peace isn't just about a treaty on paper. It's about something more. something real. He paused, letting his words sink in. The other leaders exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the soft, diplomatic approach they had expected. The humans weren't asking for peace, they were demanding it. "We're here because we're tired of fighting. But I won't sit at this table and let my people be trampled on. If you want peace, then you'll have to give us something real. Something that doesn't just end the war but ensures it never happens again." For a moment the room was silent. Clark's words had struck a nerve. The leaders were uncomfortable. They were used to being the ones who dictated terms. And here was a human, someone they considered a lesser species, standing before them and demanding respect. The Zorath representative stood next, his reptilian face twisted in frustration. "You dare speak to us this way, human? You have no place here, your species is still in its infancy. You've had your time on the battlefield, but this is diplomacy." Clark didn't flinch. "And yet here we are," he said, his voice cold. "We're at this table because you know we're not going away. You know that humanity is a force you can't just ignore. If you want peace, then treat us as equals. We're done being looked down upon. And if you can't respect that, then this is where we leave." Another wave of murmurs ran through the room. It was unheard of for a representative to walk out of peace talks. The very idea that the humans might do so sent a chill through the assembled leaders. Clark looked around at the table once more. His gaze swept over each leader, his eyes hard and unwavering. "We're done here unless you can offer something that doesn't just look like peace, something that truly ends the war." He turned to walk away. His team followed without hesitation. They had come for peace, but they weren't going to settle for anything less than real peace. The doors closed behind them and the leaders of the galaxy sat in stunned silence. The doors to the conference room slid shut with a soft hiss, and an eerie silence filled the chamber. The galactic leaders remained frozen in their seats, stunned by the human delegation's abrupt departure. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. For a moment the room was still, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to break the silence. But no one did. General Clark's words echoed in their minds, leaving behind a deep, uncomfortable truth. Humanity had just walked away from the peace talks. The Brellian leader, a towering figure with skin like molten stone, was the first to speak. "How dare they?" His voice was a growl sharp with disbelief. "How dare they leave us behind? We are the ones who have held the peace process together, not them." The Zorath representative, a cold-eyed reptilian creature, hissed in agreement. "The audacity! They're not even fit to negotiate peace. This is a mistake. We cannot let them dictate the terms." But as the Zorath spoke, a ripple of doubt passed through the room. The other leaders exchanged glances, their faces tight with frustration and confusion. This wasn't just about the humans leaving. It was about what their absence meant. It was a direct challenge, a declaration that humanity was no longer just another pawn in the galaxy's games. They were a force in their own right, and they had just proved it. The Rylac representative, a bird-like creature with feathers that shimmered in the light, shifted uncomfortably. "They've turned this on its head," she said softly, almost to herself. "We underestimated them." The Zorath leader scoffed. "Underestimated them? They've ruined everything. Do they think they can just walk out and expect us to bow down to their demands?" "They have made their demands clear," the Rylac leader replied, finally speaking up. "And they have made it known that they're not afraid to stand alone. I don't think we should disregard that." The room fell quiet again. The weight of the Rylac's words was undeniable. The humans weren't like the other species. They weren't used to this kind of power. They weren't just here to win a battle or claim territory. They were here for something bigger. And the other factions knew that they had no choice but to adapt or risk losing humanity as an ally, or worse, an enemy. Back on the human side of the negotiations, General Clark's team was gathered in a small debriefing room. The walls were lined with monitors, displaying the shocked reactions from various galactic leaders. But Clark wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking at his team. Ambassador Hennings, a seasoned diplomat who had worked tirelessly to bring humanity's voice to the table, was the first to break the silence. You were right. They were never serious about peace. Clark nodded, his expression unreadable. It wasn't about peace for them. It was about control. Henning stood up, her voice firm. We didn't come here to be controlled. We came here to end the war, our war, and we will end it on our terms. Clark looked over at Lieutenant Jack Walker, who had been silent since they left the meeting. Jack was young, but there was a quiet strength in him that Clark admired. Jack, Clark said, his voice softer now, what do you think? Jack looked up from the table, meeting Clark's gaze. I think we've given them enough time to figure out what they want. Now it's our turn. They can either follow our lead or we'll walk again. They won't win this war without us. Clark smiled, though it was a rare, tight expression. Exactly. We fight for something bigger than ourselves. We fight for our future. And if they can't see that, then they'll regret it. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Peace Station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The leaders of the various factions sat in their seats, some fuming, others nervous. The sudden departure of the humans had left a vacuum, and no one knew how to fill it. We cannot just let them leave, the Brellian leader insisted, pounding a fist on the table. We cannot let anyone walk away from peace talks. The Rylak leader shook her head. We don't have a choice. They've made their stance clear. They are not interested in peace, at least not the way we've defined it. The Zoreth leader was packing now, his claws clicking against the floor. This is outrageous. We must track them down and force them back to the table. But one of the lesser representatives, a quiet voice from the far end of the table, spoke up. What if they're right? The room grew silent as all eyes turned to him. What if they're right about peace? What if we've been so focused on our own interests that we've lost sight of what truly matters? His words hung in the air, unsettling, because no one had dared consider that. The idea that maybe, just maybe, humanity had been right to walk away. Back on Earth, the decision to walk away from the peace talks was already sending ripples across the galaxy. News networks were buzzing with the unprecedented move by the humans. Was it a bold power play, or was it a fatal mistake? Leaders of various systems watched from afar, some skeptical, others fearful. The Zorath, still smarting from their failure to break the humans in battle, were growing desperate. The Brellians were more cautious, waiting to see if the humans would stand their ground. The Rylaks, ever pragmatic, saw this as a challenge to their own influence, but also as an opportunity to change the narrative. And amidst it all, humanity stood. They had made a choice. They had refused to be subjugated to the whims of the galactic powers, and now they were watching to see how the galaxy would respond. General Clark's voice echoed in the back of their minds, a quiet promise to his people. We're not here to beg for peace. We're here to fight for it. As the leaders of the galaxy discussed and debated their next steps, they couldn't ignore the fact that humanity had just taken a stand that would shape the course of history. The galaxy wasn't the same anymore. The humans had just proven that they weren't just another faction. They were a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy trembled with uncertainty. The shock of humanity's departure from the peace talks rippled through every sector, sparking heated debates across countless systems. As leaders scrambled to formulate a response, it became clear that the humans had done something no one expected. They had defied the established order of the galaxy, not with violence, but with something far more powerful, conviction. Back on Earth, General Nathaniel Clark's decision was already being discussed in hushed tones, splashed across news screens in every corner of the galaxy. Some praised his courage, others saw it as a dangerous gamble that could tip the galaxy back into war. In the midst of it all, humanity stood tall. The world was watching, and so were the stars. In the grand halls of the Galactic Council, things were far from calm. The Brellians, with their glowing amber eyes and granite-like skin, were the most vocal. Their leader, Exodus, a massive figure who towered over the table, slammed his fist down. "This is intolerable. We can't let them walk away. Do they think they are above the rest of us? They've had their moment. Now they need to come back to the table and accept the terms." The Zorath representative, Vrextra, a creature with scales like dark iron and eyes that gleamed like burning coals, hissed in agreement. "We must show them their place. Humanity has no place here, no right to dictate the future of the galaxy." The tension in the room was palpable, each leader leaning in as the debate grew more heated. But amidst the outbursts, one voice remained calm. Coralin, the Rylac representative, a bird-like being with shimmering plumage, raised a wing to silence the others. "We have been debating peace for decades." Coralin's voice cut through the chaos, steady and measured. "But what does peace mean if it is built on broken promises, on demands that favor one over the other? We all know the truth. We want peace, but we all want something else too: control. The humans walked away because they see the game for what it is, and we have to face that." The room went still. No one spoke for a long moment. The truth Coralin had spoken was unsettling. For the first time, the leaders of the galaxy realized that humanity wasn't playing the same game. They weren't here to negotiate for land or resources. They were fighting for something deeper, something all-encompassing. Meanwhile, on Earth, the aftermath of the decision to walk away was just beginning to unfold. General Clark was back in his command center, surrounded by his trusted team. Henning stood beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Clark, standing tall in his military uniform, didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, unwavering as he stared out over the darkened skyline of Earth's capital. "I expected it," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "I knew the galaxy would be upset, but we can't just keep pretending that we'll play by their rules. They'll have to deal with the consequences of their own actions." Hennings frowned. "But what if we've pushed them too far? What if this triggers a new war? We've barely had time to recover from the last one." Clark turned to face her, his expression hard but not unkind. "We don't start wars, Sarah, but we won't back down from one either. It's time the galaxy knows that humanity is not to be underestimated. We won't accept being silenced anymore." Hennings nodded slowly. "I agree, but the fallout, it's going to be huge. Are we ready for that?" Clark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the view of the bustling Earth below. "We'll be ready. Humanity always is." Across the galaxy, the response to humanity's walkout was swift and brutal. The Brellians, feeling insulted and enraged, began mobilizing their fleet. They declared that humanity had violated the terms of the ceasefire and vowed to retaliate. Their words were harsh and filled with venom, but they weren't the only ones. The Zorath, still nursing their wounds from the war, immediately began strengthening their borders, preparing for the possibility of renewed conflict. Their propaganda machines went into overdrive, demonizing humanity as selfish and reckless. Even the Rylacs, who had initially shown some understanding, began to waver. Coralin, their representative, was questioned by the other leaders. "What did you expect? That humanity would sit quietly while we divided up the galaxy?" Vrextra spat. "They showed weakness. Now they must pay for it." But Coralin, though unsettled by the humans' departure, remained resolute. "It was never about weakness. It was about standing for something. If we cannot see that, then we'll be trapped in this cycle forever." Back on Earth, a different kind of pressure was building. The war had left scars, and the peace talks had been humanity's chance for healing. But now, with the entire galaxy watching, it was clear that humanity was no longer just a participant in galactic affairs. They were a force. In the halls of Earth's capital, officials and military leaders gathered to discuss the fallout. Clark and his team were in the thick of it, having to navigate the political landscape of a galaxy that was no longer united. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Clark said in a briefing. We're fighting for a future where humanity doesn't just survive but thrives. We can't allow the galaxy to push us into the shadows again. If they want a war, they'll get one. But it won't be one that we lose. Back at the Galactic Peace Station, the news of humanity's bold decision to walk away continued to ripple through the galaxy. It wasn't just a walkout. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that humanity was no longer just another race in the galaxy. They were a power to be reckoned with, and the others could either accept it or be crushed under the weight of their own pride. The remaining leaders of the galaxy began to see the truth. Humanity had shifted the balance of power, and they were no longer in control. As the galaxy braced for what came next, one thing was certain: the humans had begun to define their own destiny. And that was something no one, not even the most powerful beings in the galaxy, could take away from them. The days following humanity's walkout from the peace talks were tense, to say the least. The galaxy had been used to playing its diplomatic games, to sitting at tables and discussing terms that always seemed to favor the powerful. But now, humanity had thrown that all aside. They had walked away, and the rest of the galaxy was left reeling from the consequences. General Clark had known that walking away wasn't just a statement, it was a risk. But standing there, watching the galaxy's leaders scramble to understand humanity's refusal, he felt a strange sense of calm. It was not that he wanted war, no, peace was still the ultimate goal. But humanity had reached the point where they were no longer going to bow down. They were done being pawns in someone else's game. They would write their own rules from here on out. Back at Earth's Central Command, Clark sat in his office, surrounded by advisors and military leaders. The room was charged with urgency, but Clark remained as calm as ever. The discussion was heated, but his voice was steady. "We've made our position clear. If the galaxy wants peace, they need to come to the table properly," he said. "We're not interested in playing their games. If they want to attack, we'll be ready." Ambassador Sarah Hennings, standing beside him, was looking over the latest intelligence reports. The Zorath have already begun fortifying their borders. The Brellians are assembling their fleets. It seems they think this is just a ploy, a way for us to gain an advantage. "It doesn't matter what they think," Clark replied. "What matters is what we do next. We can't afford to back down. The galaxy needs to understand that we're a force they cannot ignore." Hennings nodded. "But we need to be careful. There are many factions. A full-scale war could tear the galaxy apart again. We might not survive that." "We won't have a choice if we don't stand firm," Clark said, his voice low but filled with determination. "The galaxy respects strength. They've always respected strength." Meanwhile, on the Galactic Peace Station, the mood was anything but calm. The leaders of the Brellian, Zorath, and Rylak factions convened in private, furious at humanity's audacity. The idea that humanity could walk away from the peace talks without repercussions was something none of them could accept. "We've given them the chance," the Zorath commander Vrextra snarled, "and they turned their backs on it. The humans have made their choice, now we make ours." Exodus, the Brellian leader, slammed his fist onto the table. "I say we strike. We show them that peace is earned, not demanded. If they want to stand alone, we'll force them to understand the price of that decision." Coraline, the Rylak representative, remained silent for a moment, her feathers ruffling slightly. When she spoke, it was with a quiet, almost reluctant understanding. "I've been in enough battles to know that we can't underestimate them. The humans fought us on the battlefield and won. If we push them too far, we may find ourselves at war again, and this time they will not be the underdogs." Vrextra narrowed his eyes. "So what? We sit here waiting for them to dictate the terms. We can't allow that." "No," Coraline said, her voice calm but firm. "We must take a step back and understand what this means. Humanity isn't playing by the same rules. They've made their stand. We should listen to it, not just respond with anger." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Coraline's words had a weight to them, and the other leaders couldn't ignore the truth behind them. Humanity had just upended the power dynamics in the galaxy, and it was clear that the path forward would be far more complicated than any of them had anticipated. On Earth, the pressure continued to mount, but General Clark was resolute. His team had begun preparing for the worst, strengthening Earth's defenses, mobilizing the fleet, and preparing to defend humanity's new position in the galaxy. There was no turning back now. At a closed meeting, Clark addressed his senior officers. "We're standing on the edge," he said, packing in front of the large map that displayed various galactic sectors. "The Brellians are already talking about retaliation. The Zorath will follow, but this is our moment. Humanity doesn't need to dominate the galaxy. We don't need to conquer it, but we will stand up for ourselves. If they want war, we'll fight. But if they want peace, they need to come to us with respect." Lieutenant Jack Walker stood at attention, his eyes locked on Clark. "What's the next step, sir?" Clark looked at the map, his expression focused. "We prepare. We send a message. The galaxy needs to know that we are not afraid to defend our future." Back on the Galactic Peace Station, a decision was being made. After days of heated debates, the leaders of the galaxy's factions reluctantly came to a conclusion. They would meet again, but this time, the humans would be the ones to dictate the terms. If the peace talks were to continue, it would be on humanity's terms, not the old ways. The news rippled through the galaxy quickly. The human response was clear, and it had shaken the foundations of galactic diplomacy. Humanity was not going to be pushed around anymore. They had proven themselves on the battlefield, and now they were proving it at the negotiation table. The Zorath and the Brellians were left scrambling. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were faced with the uncomfortable truth. They had to negotiate with them, whether they liked it or not. The power dynamics of the galaxy were shifting, and the humans were at the center of it. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was forced to acknowledge that the age of dominance by the old empires was coming to an end. The humans had changed the rules, and they had shown that they would no longer bend to anyone's will. In the quiet aftermath, General Clark stood in his command center, watching the stars stretch out before him. His mind was sharp, his focus unwavering. The path ahead would be difficult, but humanity had earned its place among the stars. The galaxy would never be the same again. "We've made our stand," Clark whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now it's time to see if they can respect it." The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The humans had walked away, leaving the peace talks in chaos. It wasn't just a simple rejection. It was a statement, a powerful, defiant message that rippled through every faction in the galaxy. They had disrupted the status quo, and now the galaxy had to face the consequences. The Galactic Council convened again. This time there was no sense of unity, no shared purpose. The once cohesive alliance had fractured. The Brellians were furious, the Zorath were seething, and the Rylax were quietly observing, trying to make sense of the human move. Everyone had an opinion, but no one knew what to do next. In the heart of the council chamber, Exodus, the Brellian leader, paced furiously. His massive stone-like form loomed over the others, his eyes flashing with anger. "They've made their decision, and now they'll have to live with it," he growled. "This isn't diplomacy, it's insubordination. They think they're a power in this galaxy now. They think they can just walk away and dictate the terms. I say we remind them who holds the power here." The Zorath leader, Vrextra, nodded in agreement, his voice sharp. "The humans have overplayed their hand. If they want a fight, we'll give them a fight they can't win." But amidst the anger and frustration, Coraline, the Rylac representative, spoke up. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable firmness to it. "We've seen the humans on the battlefield. We've seen what they are capable of. They may be new to galactic politics, but they're not new to war. We can't simply dismiss them as a threat. If we do, we may find ourselves fighting a war we didn't want." The room grew still at her words. The Zorath and Brellians glared at her, but there was no denying the truth in her statement. The humans had not only won battles, they had defied the galaxy's expectations. And that defiance had shaken the very foundations of galactic power. Back on Earth, General Nathaniel Clark's team was preparing for the next phase. The tension was thick in the air, and Clark knew that the stakes had never been higher. They had made their stand, but the galaxy's response could determine whether they had peace or war. There was no middle ground now. Clark stood in front of a holographic map of the galaxy, his eyes scanning the flashing lights representing key locations. The humans were outnumbered, but they were no longer backing down. "We're not going to be the galaxy's punching bag anymore," he muttered to himself. Hennings entered the room, her face serious but calm. "We've received new intel. The Brellians are mobilizing their fleet and the Zoreth aren't far behind. We'll have to prepare for a possible escalation. They're not going to let us walk away from this." Clark's jaw tightened. "I expected that, but they have to understand something. We're not afraid to fight for what's ours, and what's ours is our future." Lieutenant Jack Walker, standing at attention by the doorway, spoke up. "General, what if they don't back down? What if we end up facing a full-scale war?" Clark turned toward him, his expression hardening. "Then we fight. We fight with everything we've got. But we won't go down without making sure they understand that humanity isn't something they can just walk over anymore." The day that followed was marked by heavy military activity across human-held territories. Humanity had always been prepared for war, but now it was more than just defense. It was the fight for their place in the galaxy, and if the galactic powers wanted to challenge them, humanity would not stand idle. Back at the Galactic Peace Station, the discussions continued, but there was a growing sense of uncertainty among the leaders. The Rylax, once cautious, now seemed more conflicted. Corallin's earlier words had struck a chord, and the more they thought about humanity's walkout, the more they realized they couldn't ignore the power the humans now wielded. "We can't continue this negotiation if we don't address the humans properly," Corallin said to the others, her feathers shifting as she spoke. "The way forward needs to be different. We must acknowledge that humanity is not just a pawn in this game. If we want peace, we'll have to come to them, not the other way around." Exodus snorted. "Why should we go to them? They are the ones who walked away." "We cannot win this by force," Corallin replied firmly. "You saw the reports. We cannot win another war with humanity without suffering terrible losses. We must talk to them, listen to them." Reluctantly, the other leaders nodded. They understood the stakes. The war had already cost them dearly, and another conflict with humanity could be disastrous for all sides. The galactic leaders made their decision. They would send a representative to Earth, not as a conqueror, but as an emissary, someone to bring humanity back to the negotiating table. The question was, would humanity even entertain the idea of peace? Back on Earth, General Clark watched the stars from his office window. The silence was deafening. The decision to walk away had been hard, but in his heart he knew it was the right one. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they wouldn't be passive observers anymore. They weren't a small, insignificant species any longer. They had the strength, the will, and the power to stand up to anyone. Clark turned to Hennings, who had entered the room silently. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet concern. "We wait," Clark replied. "The ball is in their court now. If they want peace, they'll have to come to us, but they'll do it on our terms. This is our galaxy as much as it is theirs." Hennings nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. "And if they don't come, if they keep pushing?" "Then we show them who we are," Clark said, his voice resolute, "and we fight." In the coming days, as the human forces prepared for whatever came next, the rest of the galaxy watched. The message had been sent. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They were a force that would shape the future, whether the galaxy liked it or not. The galactic powers had always believed they were the ones in control, but the humans had made it clear. The future of the galaxy was theirs to define. The days following humanity's dramatic exit from the peace talks were a whirlwind. The galaxy was unsettled. Messages were exchanged, alliances shifted, and the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing hour. The diplomatic tables had shifted, but the galaxy was unsure of how to respond. Some were quietly afraid, others were furious. All were watching. General Nathaniel Clark had known that walking away from the peace talks was a gamble. It was a decision that would alter the future of the galaxy, but he was ready. Humanity's place was no longer negotiable. He had seen too many species try to crush them, too many times when they were told their place was at the bottom. Now, it was clear that humanity would stand for something more, and if the galaxy didn't like it, they would have to face the consequences. In the chambers of the Galactic Council, a new meeting was being convened. The leaders of the galaxy's factions gathered once more, but this time they came with uncertainty in their hearts. The presence of the human delegation was no longer at the table. The room felt colder, quieter. For the first time, the leaders of the galaxy were not sure of their next move. It wasn't just the humans they had to worry about now, it was the ripple effect of their absence. The Zoreth leader, Vrextra, stood, his reptilian face filled with anger, his tail lashed behind him, a sign of his growing frustration. We let them walk away, and now we face the consequences. Humanity has proven they are not interested in peace on our terms. We cannot let them dictate this galaxy. His voice was low, dangerous. We must act, send a fleet to Earth, force them back to the table. The Brellian leader, Exodus, remained silent for a moment before speaking. His massive form shifted slightly as his voice echoed in the chamber. Sending a fleet may only provoke them more. The humans have shown they're not afraid of war. We may find ourselves fighting on two fronts if we push them too far. The Rylac representative, Coralyn, the voice of reason among the leaders, spoke softly, but her words carried weight. We can't keep treating humanity like it's just another race to dominate. They're not like the others. We've seen them fight, and they've proven they can hold their own. If we push them into a corner, they won't hesitate to push back. And when they do, it will be far worse than any war we've ever known. The room fell silent. The Brellians and Zoreth exchanged glances, their pride wounded. For the first time, they felt uncertain, out of control. "What do you suggest, Coralyn?" Exodus asked, his voice strained. Coralyn's eyes gleamed with the weight of her thoughts. "We need to show humanity that we're willing to meet them halfway. We need to offer them something real, not empty promises." Vrextra spat. "And what if they refuse? What if this is just a game to them?" "We'll never know unless we try," Coralyn said firmly. "But if we continue down this path, we risk more than just war. We risk losing everything." The other leaders sat back in their seats, each lost in their thoughts. The implications of Coralyn's words hung in the air like a thick fog. Humanity wasn't just another player in the game. They had the power to shape the future of the galaxy, whether the galaxy was ready or not. Back on Earth, General Clark sat in his command center, reviewing the latest reports. The Brellians were massing ships near the outer rim, and the Zoreth had sent scout vessels near human space. Tensions were rising, and Clark knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. "We need to prepare," Clark said, his voice low and steady. "If they want war, they'll have it, but if they want peace, they'll have to come to us with respect." Lieutenant Jack Walker stepped forward, his eyes filled with resolve. "Do you think they'll really come, after all this, after we walked out?" Clark paused, his eyes scanning the map of the galaxy. The human fleet was small compared to the others, but they had something more valuable: unity, strength, and an unyielding will to survive. "They'll come," Clark said, "but on our terms." Henning stood by the window, watching the stars in the distance. "It's hard to believe, isn't it, that after everything, we're the ones setting the terms now. We're the ones who have forced them to rethink their approach." Clark nodded. "We've earned it. They'll come to realize that humanity is not just a survivor, we're a force. And they'll either learn to respect that, or they'll face the consequences." Meanwhile, the other factions watched from the shadows. The Brellians had been the first to respond, but others were following suit. Rumors spread like wildfire. The humans had won battles, sure, but now they were playing a dangerous game. No one knew if this was a bluff or if humanity truly had the strength to back up their demands. There was one thing everyone could agree on, however. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had made their mark, and it was not a small one. The next steps would determine whether the galaxy descended into another war, or if a new order could be forged. As the days passed, the tension continued to rise. General Clark's decision to walk away from the peace talks had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The political landscape was shifting, and every faction was now forced to confront the reality that humanity was no longer playing by the old rules. On Earth, Clark's message was clear. They weren't going to be part of the status quo. They weren't going to bow to anyone. But what if the galaxy's leaders were too entrenched in their own ways to see reason? What if humanity's bold stance was the spark that ignited an even greater conflict? It was a risk, and Clark knew it. But in the end, he had no regrets. The galaxy was at a crossroads, and humanity had just shown everyone that they weren't afraid to make their own path. As Clark stood by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the distance, he knew that whatever happened next, humanity had already won something important. They had won their place in the galaxy. The days dragged on and the galaxy waited. Would the Brellians attack? Would the Zorath finally make their move? The leaders of the galaxy knew one thing for certain: the balance had shifted. Humanity had proven that they were no longer to be underestimated. The galaxy had been warned.